What's going on, guys? In this week's video, we are finally getting to the laundry list of parts I need to install in the Camaro. So the two main projects I want to try and get knocked out is a Vintage Air 4th Gen AC system, as well as a Detroit Speed dash with all brand new gauges. Currently, the only gauge I have in the car that works is a fuel gauge, so this is much needed upgrade, and I'm starting to drive the car quite a bit more, so the AC system is just going to be a nice thing to have. We have a ton of work to do inside the car as well. So I never even got around to mounting my Holley Terminator X ECU because I wasn't sure if I was going to have enough room kind of up inside the dash with that new Vintage Air unit in there. So that's something that'll need to be figured out once that system is installed, whether there's going to be room for it there or it might end up living underneath the passenger seat. I know that's a pretty common place for people to put them. So what I'm going to do now is start to just disassemble everything. I need to yank out the entire dash. I'm going to pull the steering wheel off, get that out of the way, the dash pad. Then we're going to move to under the hood and start to kind of pull a lot of that apart. I believe, according to the instructions for the Vintage Air, it really wants you to take off the hood and this front right fender. The pile of parts we've removed is getting bigger and bigger. So got the entire dash stripped out, all the gauges and everything, of course, as you can see. I'm labeling a couple of things that I'm obviously going to need to keep, like the wiring that goes to the fuel gauge, left and right turn signal, high beam indicator, that kind of stuff. Some of this I'm not going to utilize. I'm not going to run like an oil light or anything like that, at least not from here. If I run anything like that, I'm going to run it straight from the Holley ECU. None of this stuff is really connected on the other end. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff I'm going through and cutting and removing as well, just like the old heater wiring, and there's a few things, like I don't know if you can see right in the center of the screen there, that is just like a ground that's just haphazardly sheet metal screwed to this dash support. That's the kind of stuff I'm looking for and I want to address now. I want to make sure all of our grounds are properly done, nice, secure, nothing's gonna vibrate or rattle loose and then cause us issues down the road. So that's a lot of the side project stuff I was talking about. It's just cleaning up a lot of this unnecessary junk and doing it the right way. I got some assistance last night removing the hood as well as this right front fender. Main reason I pulled this off is because it's just going to give us much easier access to the blower motor and this whole entire heater core assembly. With the fender in place, I believe it's possible, but it would just be much more difficult. First thing I'm going to do today is going to be drain the cooling system because I want to make sure all of that coolant is out so that when I do remove this heater core blower motor, no coolant leaks out into the car for obvious reasons. We're also going to remove stuff like the hood latch, so we'll have room up there to get the condenser in. Yeah, just a lot of stuff to do under the hood, so let's get to it. Coolant's all drained and I got the blower motor and everything removed as well. All came out with no real issues. So the next step is for me to flatten out the lip around this opening. It doesn't really say how to do it, so I don't think it really matters all that much. So what I'm going to do is just take a pair of pliers and kind of bend it in where it's somewhat flat, and then I'll take a hammer and dolly and kind of flatten it all up. It doesn't need to be perfect. There's just a big piece of flat sheet metal that kind of bolts in to cover that up with the kit, so we just need it to sit flush. I'm starting to get my lines run through the firewall, but I want to touch on something really quick. So this kit is a little bit above and beyond what a typical, I would say, bolt-in kit would be, because some of this stuff you have to order separately. Heater hoses, heat insulation, stuff like that doesn't come in the kit because it is somewhat universal as far as the way you're going to route your hoses. They don't know what engine you have in your car and which direction you want to go. So there is some customization to that. Not a big deal with heater hoses because you just buy it by the foot, cut it to length. A little bit more difficult though with these AC hoses because they come with no fitting on the end. It's up to you to cut it to length and then crimp on these style fittings. So they just come just like this, a fitting on one side, nothing on the other side, and then we have our 3 fittings in the kit. The problem with that is, if you're just a DIYer like me, you don't have a $150 dedicated AC fitting crimp tool. So you either have to take them to a shop and get them crimped, or if you're like me, I ordered the tool. I'm gonna need to order a belt of a custom length. They don't know what kind of accessories I'm running, so they can't really provide a belt in the kit. So just a couple of things to think about. I did also do a little bit of research on how long this project is supposed to take. And if you go to a shop to have this kit installed, most shops are gonna charge you 40 hours of labor. So basically a full week for them to install it. Most shops are also going to charge $75 to $100 an hour for labor. So you're looking at right around $4,000 in just labor. So being able to do it yourself is going to save a whole heck of a lot of money. This install is no joke. So I have basically everything done on the inside as far as the evaporator and all that set up, mounted, wired, plumbed, all the hoses and everything go through there, pop out up here, all nice and clean. I have the wiring done. I have the hoses all run too. I just don't have the louvers installed yet because I have to have my dash pad and stuff installed, and then obviously the dash over there for the driver's side. So I believe we are ready to move out into the engine bay finally, where I'm going to install the AC compressor and also the condenser in front of the radiator, because I have to have those parts in place for me to actually determine how long any of these lines need to be. My wire crimping tool did just get delivered, so we have that when we're ready for it. I got my compressor all bolted in place and torqued to spec. What I'm doing now is figuring out the belt length I need. The kit claims that if you have a factory GM alternator and power steering bracket, you'll need a 100.25 inch belt. I have my flexible measuring tape routed exactly where the belt is going to go. I'll kind of pull it tight. I want to give this tensioner, probably put it in about halfway in its range of motion so it'll actually work and give us a nice amount of tension. We'll pull that tight. Everything else looks good. Yeah, so that's 8 feet, so that's 96 inches. I mean, we really need something that's like 97. If I could pull off 97, I could pull off 97 and a half. I probably wouldn't want to go 98. That's like right at the end of the tensioner's length. So I'm going to see if I can find something that's closer to like 97 inches. That's quite a bit shorter than what they called for. So I'm glad I checked it. I'm working on getting our custom AC hoses all cut to length and crimped. I already did the short one just to kind of test out the tool and make sure I understand exactly how it works. It really couldn't be simpler. So I'm going to show you on this larger one. So this one runs from inside the car. It's going to be inside the fender and then up to this large connector on the compressor itself. I already cut it to length. What I also did, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see or not, but I put a little mark on the fitting as well as on the hose with exactly how I want it to be clocked when I crimp it on there, just so that we can utilize the kind of natural bend of the hose and we're not fighting against it. I've got the number 10 die in the tool. Just make sure you guys can see what I'm doing. It's kind of a three-handed operation, but okay. And then we basically just pump this until the dies touch. We'll go one more. Just like that, and then we can hit our little release hose. Put the tool down. There's our hose all crimped on. So I got all our lines installed and tightened up. I also went ahead and pulled off all of the wiring from the top of the engine and kind of put the harness in a different position, flipped some things over, and just found a better way to route everything, and it is much cleaner now. I don't know if you remember from before, but there was like a huge bundle of wires like right here. Now it's all nice tucked behind the engine, stuff's all zip tied out of the way, away from any heat sources. Should be much better. These last two wires will be cleaned up here shortly. That's just a battery and then the trigger for our fuel pump. This is the starter wire, so I'll figure out a nice place to run that and kind of zip tie it out of the way as well. But I'm excited that with this new firewall block off plate and that wiring, all of this under the hood is going to be much, much cleaner than it was. So I have the car up on my race ramps because I need to access a couple of things underneath the car to do our gauges. So originally I was going to do this 2 separate videos, one for the AC and one for the gauges. I decided we're just going to make it one long video. Hopefully you guys are cool with that. So for the oil pressure, I need to access the oil filter housing because we're going to be drilling and tapping that for our sensor. The transmission is going to have a sensor on it, or already has a sensor on it we need to access for a speedometer. And then I'm going to need to drop the gas tank and install a different ohm rating fuel level sender for our new fuel gauge to work properly. Starting out with one of the easier ones for today. So this is my fuel level sender right here. Just 5 screws and it pops right out. This is what it looks like on the inside. So the reason I had to switch this out is just because the factory one, I believe, is like 0 to 80 or 0 to 90 ohms from when the tank is empty to full. This new one requires like a 34 to 280. I don't know, it's a different ohm range. So they make converters, but the converters cost about the same as just buying a whole new unit. So I decided to just go this route. Super quick, easy 2-wire hookup as well. This one just runs all the way into the car to the gauge. The other one is just a ground. So I'm going to swap that out. We'll put the tank back up in place and move on to the next one. The fuel level sender is in. Now we have 2 connections to make on the transmission. So this longer one is actually for our reverse lights, something I just never hooked up when I did the 6-speed swap in the car. That's just a quick 2-wire connection. The other one is for our vehicle speed sensor. This is also a 2-wire connection. This is going to be run straight to our speedometer. Now, I am going to have to do a little bit of calibration once everything's installed in the car. Let me walk you through my plan for the oil pressure. So this is a little cover that goes right over the oil filter housing on an LS. Typically they would have a little kind of raised piece right here. On the C5 Corvettes, that's for a oil temperature sensor. On the F bodies, it's just blank. For whatever reason, my engine's out of a GTO. It doesn't have any spot for it, but it is hollow on the inside here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set this up in my mill. I'm going to take an end mill, kind of flatten out right at the tip of this, like right about where my finger is right there. Make a nice flat area right there. Then I'm going to drill it and tap it for 1/8 NPT. Here's a glimpse of what it looks like on the engine itself. As you can see, plenty of clearance around the header. It's just one single wire that will run up through a grommet in the firewall and then to the dash. Next up is going to be coolant temperature, and on the LS there is a plug right here on the back side of the passenger side head that Classic Instruments sells a little adapter for. It's a 12mm thread, so I just got one of those. We're going to pull that out, screw this in, and this is also just a single wire that will run through the firewall and up to the gauge itself. Making a ton of progress. So late yesterday I went ahead and drilled all the holes and got everything kind of mounted in place, make sure it all looked good, pulled it apart, gave it all a coat of paint so it could sit overnight and dry. Now I put the gauges all back in for, well, hopefully be the final time, and I am stoked with how it's turning out. It looks great. I mean, all the gauges are in line and, you know, perfectly spaced. That kit that comes with this Detroit Speed dash was an absolute lifesaver. Only thing I messed up on is I went a little bit too big on the hole at the bottom of this AC vent, which will probably annoy me a little bit, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not worth having to like cut out a piece and weld in here, and you know, I should have just taken a little bit more of my time, but I can live with that. For now, I'm going to run the stock headlight switch. I'm also going to run the stock wiper switch, but I'm just going to have it kind of hang under the dash for now, because hopefully in the not too distant future I will be going with the Detroit Speed wiper kit, and the hole needed for that is much different than the factory switch. I don't want to have to patch that when we upgrade. Same goes for the stereo. I just didn't cut anything in right now because I'm still determining how I want to do a stereo in this car. It's not going to be a traditional single DIN radio. I want to do something either kind of completely hidden that's Bluetooth only, or I don't know, I got a couple of ideas, but didn't want to just cut a big hole in there that's going to be blank for now. So what I'm going to move on to now is the wiring. So I'm going to do my best to keep this nice and clean, also simplify it a lot. A lot of things like these lights and a couple of the gauges, I can just run them all to one single ground. I don't need anything too crazy. A couple of these might need a dedicated ground because they use that for the actual signal itself. I'll have to kind of look into that. But I want to simplify as much of this wiring as absolutely possible so that it minimizes what I have to do under the dash. There's not going to be much room to get back here when this is installed installed in the car. So as much as I can do now to clean it up and make it simple, it's just going to save me a lot of headache later on. Got the wiring on the back of the gauges all sorted out and went ahead and threw them in the car. It's looking really, really good. There's only one thing that's bugging me so far, and that is this little gap right here. I'm guessing that's just, you know, what happens when you have aftermarket dash pads meets up with aftermarket, you know, bezels, and like everything is just not OEM here. So there's going to be some kind of mismatch of parts. Well, after nearly 7 full days of work, I believe I'm ready to turn the key. There's still some wiring I didn't fully clean up, but I'm running out of time for this project because I need to paint that CB550 before a transporter comes and picks it up and brings it to its new owner. So we're gonna go in, turn the key, and kind of check some of the operations here. Not gonna start the engine just yet. I believe I'm gonna need to do some programming for the tachometer. Okay, those gauges move. Fuel pump is pumping. All right, we got gas. I believe that's pretty accurate as far as how much gas is in the tank, so that's perfect. Don't know if the coolant's working yet. Tach moved for a minute. Battery looking pretty good. Okay, go for left turn signal. Yeah, right. And then we'll go headlights, so we should get lights in all the gauges. Boom, boom, boom. Sweet. Headlights are on in the car. We'll go for the high beam. Hey, hey, hey. Sweet. We are ready for the first start. So obviously I haven't charged the system yet. I'm probably going to do that first thing tomorrow morning. What I'm checking now is just to make sure that our gauges actually work. Our, you know, voltmeter goes up, oil pressure turns on. It's going to take a little bit for it to warm up, for the coolant temperature to read, that kind of stuff. I'm also making sure that none of our new sensors we install leak at all. And then, of course, the belt needs to be running true. There's just a lot that basically everything I touched, I'm just going to make sure I didn't break. So. Overall, pretty successful first test, but not without its issues. Main one is our oil pressure sensor is leaking. It's leaking right around the threads. I was a little bit worried about that. Using that style oil, what do they call that thing? An oil cooler bypass. There just wasn't a ton of room to get a bunch of threads in there. And it's obviously a full oil pressure kind of right behind that. So I think I'm gonna need to buy the adapter that has a little bit of a neck on it, that it's gonna allow me to thread it a little bit more. I'll go ahead and order that and we'll swap it out when that gets here. So all of the gauges are reading just a little bit off. So for example, the tach is like twice as much. I guess that's a pretty big difference. So I'm gonna have to play around with a different calibration. It's said to use the calibration for a 4-cylinder when using an ECU trigger for the RPM signal. That's showing double, so maybe I'll set it to 8-cylinder and just see if that fixes our issue. The coolant temp on the gauge is reading 10 to maybe 15 degrees lower than what the Holley is saying. There are, you know, the Holley sensor is at the front left of the engine. This one's at the back right. Maybe there is that big of a difference in the block itself. Similar situation with the oil pressure. Sorry about the glare. This oil pressure on here was reading about 10 to 12 psi higher than what the Holley was. I'm guessing that's just a difference between sensor locations. The battery voltage was reading just over 13. That's pretty darn accurate compared to what the Holley was seeing. So overall, decent test, but I do want to figure out how to get that RPM signal fixed. Switching it to 8-cylinder did fix the problem. I'm not sure why the instructions told me to set it as a 4-cylinder from the beginning anyway. I'm also checking, I don't know if you can hear that, but our fan is blowing. through all 4 vents. Perfect. We will switch it to defrost. Still, oh, okay, it's not coming out of these vents, and now it's coming out up here. So tomorrow, first thing, we'll do the full procedure of vacuuming the system down and leaving it for like 45 minutes to check to make sure there's no leaks in the AC. We'll charge it, and then we'll be able to test that. It's the next morning, and I got some good news and some not so good news. So the good news is we got the system charged, just got a cheap, we're gonna vacuum pump AC gauge set up off of Amazon. I'll throw a link in the description. Seemed to work really well. Took 3 cans of R134A. We got it fully charged. Basically, I have a little sprayer here that I was having to spray the condenser down with water with a fan going on it, just to get enough cooling effect to kind of verify that everything was going to work well. When the car is out driving in the wind, everything's going to work much more efficiently than it would in the garage. So all that's good to go. We're starting to get some very nice cold air out of the vents, which is super exciting. The issue I found, I don't know if you can tell, but my belt is starting to walk backwards ever so slightly. And this is just with, you know, maybe 8-10 minutes worth of idling, and it's already almost an entire rib off the back of the pulley on the AC compressor. So what I need to do is, I'm guessing, just pull 3 of these bolts off, move the compressor back, you know, just put a washer in there or something, kind of space it back maybe a 1/16 of an inch. We'll try that just to bring it to where ideally the belt's going to run right about in the center of this pulley instead of all the way at the back, and then we can keep an eye on it and see if we need to make any more adjustments. Well, we are getting ready for our maiden voyage here. I ordered a new block off plate with 1/8 inch NPT taps already put into it. It's not quite here yet, so I just have it blocked off with a factory. Once my oil pressure gauge isn't going to work, we'll be able to test everything else out. I'm looking through the instructions right now about calibrating the speedometer. I'm going to use the method where I can just drive 30 miles per hour exactly. I'll use an app on my phone to kind of do GPS speed, go exactly 30 miles per hour. Then I hit the button and it will just take the number of pulses that it sees at that given point, say, hey, that equals 30, and then I guess do the math up and down from there. So we're going to want to get that set up before we start driving. And then we are ready to test. I'm really hoping the AC works well because it is like 103 here in Texas right now and extremely humid. I'm sweating here already. So we're gonna need that air conditioning. Yet. I'm about to pull over so we can do that, but the AC is awesome. I mean, it makes this car usable in Texas for like half the year when it's too darn hot. All the gauges besides the speedometer are working great. It's also awesome that all of the like lizard skin and heat insulation, all that stuff I've already done, is just making this work even better. So that's super exciting. I am happy to report speedometer's calibrated, that's working great, tach's working great, AC's pumping. I mean, I can definitely feel some heat still coming through. Mainly, I'm feeling it through like down the bottom of the driver's door. There's some heat coming through. Nothing coming through the roof, which is excellent. Nothing coming through the transmission tunnel. There's just a couple of spots, but for a 69 Camaro in 100+ degree heat in Texas, we are comfortable. Oh my god, this is exciting. Alright guys, that's where I'm going to call it on this video. Extremely successful, I couldn't be happier. I do have another round of upgrades coming for this thing. I'm still in the planning stages, so nothing purchased yet, but I have some big upgrades I want to make for the brakes and suspension, that kind of stuff as well. I have a video coming up on the Drift Corvette, getting that ready for competition. Will it run video, bunch of motorcycle stuff, just a ton of new content coming very, very soon. I appreciate you guys watching as always.